Everyone, thank you so much for coming this evening from New York time, or if you're in Indonesia or like other parts of the world. I know this is a very global foreign policy topic, so thank you again for coming. And yeah, so today I'll be presenting on my experience so far with integrating quantitative methods into foreign policy research. So there are some opportunities and challenges that come with it. And first of all, I want to present on the structure of this seminar. So I'll introduce myself for a bit, and then we're going to do some very fun interactive exercise. After that, we're just going to talk about foreign policy research 101 and how quantitative methods can contribute to that. After that, I'll go over a case study based on my previous experience with event data analysis. And lastly, present some challenges, takeaways, and we can proceed to Q&A. So to introduce myself, I'm Garda Ramadhito. I'm currently an associate research fellow at the Nanyang Technological University. There's a think tank called the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. We focus on regional security, international relations, and I'm in the Indonesia Programme team. I was previously a data scientist with Doctors Without Borders in the People's Analytics section. And then I also was the research assistant for Princeton's Empirical Studies of Conflict, where I studied with Jacob Shapiro and Tamar Mitz of SIPA to analyze disinformation patterns online. And then I was also a research intern at American Enterprise Institute, a really big think tank in Washington, D.C., and also Foundation for Defense of Democracies, also another think tank focusing on national security in Washington, D.C. from 2019 to 2020. I'm Columbia QMSS class of 2022, but also my undergrad was in international studies at Middlebury College and graduated from 2019. So first of all, let's do an exercise where everyone can participate and just think about ideas. So I'm going to give you a scenario where you are the lead analytics team in a national security council of Freeland, somewhere in Europe. It's a democratic middle-income country, relatively prosperous, and you have a neighbor we were really close to, but they had a military coup, and then suddenly became hostile to you. They have a lot of valuable resources, like natural resources, mines, copper, gold, coal, anything that can, give a lot of them revenue to them. And now suddenly they're an enemy to you because for some historical reason, they are an enemy. And now you are tasked with collecting a lot of data on this former ally turned enemy. So as president, you are like, as the lead national security team and the analytics section, you are tasked with two questions. What data should you start collecting immediately? And based on that data, how do you assess the level of threat? And feel free to ask more questions about this country, but I'm going to give you some clues. So this is the kind of data that we want. So we have political and elite indicators, military and security intelligence, economics and resource availability of the country, and what kind of information control and societal indicators that they have put out, and on the risk and threats coming out from based on the data. What constitutes a threat? How do you define a threat? And how do you define levels of threat? What can you tolerate? What can you manage? And what do you think is something that you have to take action on? And what are the probable and possible risks of collecting certain data? So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to think about it and we can like brainstorm, because this is an exercise that is used when intelligence analysts think about data collection and how to um, you know give a bigger picture of the assessment from the other side when talking about other countries. I think it should not take too long. Does anyone have any ideas? They want like data, what data they want to collect when something like this happens? Anyone take a stab?
I was gonna say, like, in terms of risk and threat, like what constitutes a threat. I'm sure that they have different tiers of
Mhm.
what that could constitute, and that's a determinant that they would use.
Yeah, so yeah, like threat levels, whenever you have something, like if you imagine like countries such as the United States, when you have like they say enemies, um, you have to live with enemies sometimes and like you cannot just destroy them. What do you think? What do you think it's like you can manage or tolerate as something that is, they're always making a ruckus, but they're not going to actually attack you. But when do you think they're going to attack you? So, like, what kind of data would indicate they're actually doing something, or versus they're just making noise?
I guess like things that have happened historically in the past.
Okay, okay. Like, let's say when you do like, for example, like North Korea, when they're talking, when just like the leader is speaking about like destroying the country, destroying the United States, bombing the United States, nuking the United States, versus something they actually do, which is um, testing nuclear weapons close to the United States border or some like an ally of the United States. That would be much more of a threat, right? Than when they just say something like nuking in the United States or nuking Japan. Does anyone else have any ideas of this?
So I think I would first look at the civilian level and the business relations regarding
Hmm.
the trade and enterprises, as well as the on a more higher level diplomatic relations, because the
Yeah.
coup or militia government doesn't necessarily will be against us, the stunts. So the
Hmm.
level of threats would really depend on existing sort of attitudes or sort of assess what are like sort of a stakeholder mapping, like how they would
Hmm.
sort of reshape the different sectors in their country so as to affect us. And the
Yeah.
manageable, tolerable level of threat, as far as I can see, is firstly, regarding our domestic civilians, we should ensure their safety for sure. And
Yeah.
from international perspective, just because it's a coup, and of course, we do not have that much responsibility of it. So, as
Hmm.
much as we got in much intelligence to ensure that they are abiding by international humanitarian law. I'm not sure. No, no, it doesn't apply. It's not state by state, but at least like
Hmm.
basic human rights principles and international law are obeyed. I don't see like an escalation of threat at the current stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. If you see like there are so many dimensions, right, to think about. So there, the like when whether like political and like what's domestic, and from our side or like their attitudes. At the same time, like again, like you as an analyst, you also want to be specific on the data that you collect on like what kind of movements they're trying to make. So again, we can be very specific on, for example, like the naval movements or the kind of military buildup they're doing, um, and what kind of moves in terms of resources they're trying to extract or redirecting money from certain industries to the and nationalizing them in order to make the regime richer. So these kind of things are very interesting to intelligence analysts. So I'm going to give you some possible answers. So I think what would be the clearest indicators of something becoming an actual threat to your country? There are several options. So the blue ones are political indicators. So You want to see the identity of coup leaders and then what their statements ideologically are. If the coup leaders are radical and something you cannot really like connect with, then you are in a pretty dangerous level because it means like you are much more vulnerable from their unpredictability. And then what kind of regime consolidation indicators they have. So did they completely change the government? Did they completely change the structure of the government? Does it make it much more hierarchical where they have to be responsive to the one leader they have? Or is it going to be something much more power sharing? So there's much more continuity between the administration, so you won't see them as much of a threat, right? Um, I think the big ones are really the security and intelligence and also military indicators. So again, troop deployments, whether they are like Navy is deploying toward their maritime borders, they're like having much more defensive or offensive posture. And the naval movements. So are they using new patrol routes around the country, around the island? Are they testing new weapons? Are they procuring nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons? Are they procuring from other enemy countries that you have? Um, and whether there are a lot of activity around critical military infrastructure, are there a lot of trainings, a lot of exercises that are new that are purposely trying to scare you away? And for economic indicators, are they controlling over like mines? Are they controlling a lot of the private industries? So this is a good indicator of that they're trying to really extract a lot of resources from the industries that were previously private. Um, are they trying to sanction other countries or your country? Are they trying to block your exports? These are very interesting indicators of how hostile they're going to be economically to you. And lastly, from the domestic societal side, are there a lot of protests and riots within the new country under the new regime? That means that they're vulnerable internally, and you want to know whether there are still weak spots or they're still not very consolidated internally. And maybe they're going to use war as a way to unite the people, which happened in Iran against Iraq. Um, Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can collect data-wise. And in the government side, they have much more resources to do so and much more leeway in terms of confidentiality. And because of that, there's a lot of things that we don't know about the government. And as someone from doing the foreign policy research on the civilian side or an analyst side, we're trying to recreate that kind of level of sophistication and detail into the data collection so we can also inform the public and inform policymakers and that has value on its own. And that's why I think foreign policy research is very valuable. So first now I'm gonna have uh, I'm gonna present on foreign policy research 101 and what the value is for quantitative analysis. Uh, Before this, does anyone have any questions or any comments? If not, I'm gonna move on. So what foreign policy research aims to do, there's a lot of goals, overarching goals in foreign policy research that's on the public side. So again, first of all, we want to inform the public with factual, contextual analysis of international events. We want to explain the risk, for example, of a South China Sea standoff to general audiences, to the media, to academics, to future policymakers. Secondly, we want to provide policy expertise to governments and international institutions. So a lot of think tanks, research centers, academics want to provide like really detailed guidance on how to execute policy and what is recommended. For example, how do you impose sanctions on Russian industries during the Russian invasion without really hurting Russians, but also achieving the maximum impact on the regime? Thirdly, we want to monitor geopolitical developments and detect early warning signs. So we're not caught off guard whenever something is happening, such as during the Syrian civil war. You want to track the changes in areas of control by ISIS to know whether they're getting power or they're losing power. And on the fourth point, we also want to guide policymakers with scenario assessments and impact evaluations. So again, it's similar to number one. And number two, we want to know, for example, like the defense sector, we want to know what is the likely outcomes of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan and how they can impact Asian economies and what the other Asian countries' defense posture is and readiness when there's something like this happens in the future. Lastly, we can support advocacy and norm building on issues like human rights, global health, or climate security. So again, when we have international institutions that want to support certain rules and norms and predictability in the international stage, so everything is not purely chaotic or anarchy, we want to use this research to basically promote certain norms and certain rules and certain like overarching principles and values, such especially on the issue of human rights. So, for example, we want to use data on civilian casualties to push for humanitarian corridors in war zones like Sudan or Gaza. And the real opportunity for quantitative methods is these points. So first of all, you want to challenge assumptions with evidence. So again, data provides hard evidence. And this is a world where there's a lot of assumptions being made based on previous experience or pre-existing biases. For example, you want to use trade data showing that sanctions sometimes fail due to third country leakages. We also want to provide precision in policy recommendations. Last time we had just recommend you do this, do that. Now we have more precision in this side, like for example, increase your military buildup in the border by this amount of troops. Now, quantitative methods can do that. And thirdly, we can also create real-time and granular situational awareness. So, for example, we want to track the number of certain types of attacks in a certain country that is a good proxy for the strength of a certain like rebel group or militant group in that country. So IED attacks is usually a proxy for the rise of Al Qaeda or ISIS in Iraq because that's their main modus operandi in terror attacks. Fourth, we want to improve credibility of analysis and decision making. So again, we don't want people to use analysis based on just anecdotal evidence. We want to use like systematic evidence. So data is a great way to improve the credibility of analyses and decision making. Lastly, we want to reduce selective attention and bias. Again, this is based on a lot of people saying there's certain assumptions that are pretty much widespread in foreign policy circles, and for example, and data can undermine that and challenge that. So back in 2020, remember when there's been protests, a lot of like it's not international relations or foreign policy related, but it was crossover to protest data, and that was posted by ACLID and then they kind of countered an assumption that BLM protests were very violent, but it turns out only about, I think, 8% of protests turned violent, and the vast majority of them were peaceful. So some use cases for quantitative methods that are already used in the foreign policy area is, first of all, it's economic competition analysis using trade and investment flows. So AEI, the think tank I worked for, has a China Global Investment Tracker where they collected a lot of data on investments made by Chinese firms overseas. And it's a great way to paint a picture of Chinese investments in Africa and Southeast Asia, where especially in the context of great power competition between United States and China. Secondly, agent-based simulations and war games. These are already very much used in the military, in the defense sector, and also in the foreign policy research field. For example, there's a lot of multiple ways of simulating Taiwan Straits crisis scenarios between Taiwan and China, and what are the likely outcomes in terms of refugee outflows, in terms of economic impacts in the region, in terms of the balance of power between countries in Asia. Thirdly, there is military capability and budget simulations. So another initiative by AEI was the Defense Future Simulator, which is modeling long-term defense spending trends to estimate future balance of power scenarios. And this example I'm gonna highlight later in the case study is event data analysis for conflict monitoring. So, Institute for Study of War, which is another smaller think tank in Washington, D.C., that works with AEI, maps kinetic activities of belligerents in certain wars, such as the Iran-Israel war and the Russia-Ukraine war, which is all actually very much covered by the media. When the outbreak happened in 2022, CNN used their data a lot to track daily movements of Russia and Ukraine in the war. Another use case is cyber information monitoring. So Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Lab has a network analysis revealing coordinated disinformation campaigns during elections. And lastly, early warning systems. So the Uppsala Conflict Data Program in, I think Norway has models that predict protest outbreaks or coup risks based on past data. So for this one, I'm going to present on the case study that I'm familiar with, event data analysis. I worked with event data analysis when I was at institute, the American Enterprise Institute, working with the Institute for Study of War. So event data analysis is one methodological approach where we transform raw textual information about the real world incidents into structured data that can be analyzed. So events are basically the units of analysis. So they are recorded as who did what to whom, when, and where, using standardized coding systems and automated manual extraction methods. And this can give a bigger, broader picture of movements within conflicts for conflict monitoring purposes. And this is one of the most widely used open source intelligence methodology, or OSINT, as we call it in the intelligence field. This is just an example, for example, of the tracking IED attacks that can be extracted from the event data analysis. So when you see that ISIS really peaked in about 2018, 2019 before decreasing to like the later half of the 2020s. That means that ISIS was already defeated by then. But Hezbollah, another group which is based in Lebanon, increased in strength toward 2024 with 97 attacks. And this is a good way of, predicting or characterizing the strength of a particular militant group at one time. So first of all, there are some steps to event data analysis. You, of course, do data collection. And data collection takes the most time and the most effort. So we want to gather all information from multiple sources, such as news articles, which is really the main source of a lot of things. So you have to go through all sources. Mainstream is really the most reliable, such as AP and Reuters. Local, high quality news sources are also preferable if can, and they tend to be more granular, like report very much really local stuff, really local events, and they can have good precise can make the picture much more precise. Social media posts also can be a good source based if they are trusted, coming from trusted reporters or observers on the ground, and you want to filter for biases here. NGO reports, government statements, field research notes, and satellite imagery are usually additional sources when the first two, they don't provide the events that you want to look for. Then you want to do pre-processing and cleaning. Again, a very labor-intensive and time-intensive task. The raw text and documents must be cleaned. Luckily, AI now has made this easier, but before AI was I was there in 2017 or 2018 at ISW, we had to do all this manually. So we have to remove all the duplicate articles and filter irrelevant details. We have to normalize the formats, identify the language, and extract or automate the data, such as publication time and source. So this stage prepares the text for structure extraction. And this is actually the most interesting part, which is you have an article in your interface and you have to extract the variables in the data. So we're gonna construct one line in the data set. So we want to identify who acted, what they did, to whom they did the action, where and when. So this paints like what we call a kinetic activity, which is something, an action like an attack or a counterattack. And there are two approaches. So we can manually code, which we did in the think tank, or automatically code it using NLP to extract the events based on certain schemas. But these days, I think people combine the both of them because to balance efficiency, but also make sure everything is quality controlled. So, for example, we have this article back in 2025 when you remember the escalation between Iran and Israel. We want to extract the event of the attacks that's done by the counterattack by Iran toward Israel. So, in this article, we want to again identify all these variables. First of all, who acted is very much obvious. It's Iran. So Iran, we click on this Iran as the main actor, and then what they did, which is to launch missiles toward Israel. So here we can click there, and then after that, to whom we want to click on Israel, where Tel Aviv, because it's mainly struck Tel Aviv that time, and when you want to click both day and date, and then with a technology or like a software, then all these will be structured into one event. With the data structuring, then every event will become a row in the structured data set with standardized fields such as actor one, actor two, event type, event category, date and time, location and geo coordinates, the source of the event data point, and estimated fatalities or impact. So this step converts unstructured text into machine readable data. I also want to note that the data structure sometimes will not be just purely tabular because of the nature of the network. So for example, Iran is enemies with Israel and they will be recorded as their relationship as enemies, but Iran also has allies in Lebanon and Yemen. And you want to have an actor who also maybe does something in Lebanon or in Yemen, and they have like their own event data there. You want to connect them using like a network. So it will be both tabular and network data structures. And after that, you want to do some quality control, such as removing duplicates, consistent checks across sources, make sure formats all standard, everything is not doubly or like doubly coded from different sources, and you want to cross-verify whether this is the same actor. For example, Al-Qaeda in Iraq can be also ISIS later on. So you want to make sure you have two different actors instead of one actor. And this is the final step, which is usually the quickest. You will produce this into an analysis and a visualization. So this is kind of the end result of that exercise. So you have a map showing the attacks. So again, mostly in Tel Aviv from Israel, from Iran's missile attacks, and then some in Haifa and Beersheba when you collect with other data. And this gives a picture of what the counterattack was between June 13 and June 24. And there are multiple formats to analyze the data. So you can do a time series analysis, do spatial mapping and hotspot detection, such as this one, actor network analysis, escalation and de-escalation patterns, early warning models and forecasts, dashboards, or automated monitoring tools. Or you can just even do a much more friendly to policymakers, which is just writing it in full in very clear format. So, for example, this is much more derived from the intelligence community, where you have one assessment on top of the paragraph, and then the rest of the details here listed in the paragraph. And these are some of the think tanks and organizations that do this kind of work. So ACLID it's called Armed Conflict and Location Event Dataset. They provide most of the dataset that's open source for the public to use. And they provide a comprehensive event dataset for protests, attacks, terror attacks all around the world. ISW Institute for Study of War provides daily and weekly analysis on assessments of conflicts such as Israel, Iran, Gaza, Israel, Sudan, and even Russia and Ukraine. C4ADS is another think tank, or it's called Center for Advanced Defense Studies. They do a lot more network analysis and identification of networks, such as for illicit finance and weapons smuggling. International Crisis Group also does much more of country-based risk assessment and early warning systems for conflict. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. I can move on to the challenges of doing this kind of work. So these are other examples you might be interested in. Yeah, so the challenges that comes with quantitative foreign policy research, of course, is the data limitations. There's a lot of incomplete reporting and a lot of media bias, unequal coverage across regions, and sometimes rural events are often missing from the record because of how isolated they are. And it's so difficult to verify claims due to misinformation and manipulated narratives. So that's why you have to cross-check with different sources, social media posts with mainstream media or mainstream media with, and vice versa. Of course, there are measurement and methodological issues, such as how to quantify concepts such as influence, deterrence, or legitimacy. There's ambiguity when it comes to actors when the groups split, merge, or hide identities. Or there's a noisy, and real-time data is very noisy and contains errors that require rapid cleaning. So you have to collect a lot of data to make sure that you can see an actual broader picture. Models also often rely on proxies that oversimplify political reality. So that's why you want to have probable models instead of precise models. And because a lot of events are, rare events, there's always a risk of overfitting and making and predicting too detailed ways instead of making assessments that are much more open-ended. So you always want to make sure that you, when you assess something is going to happen, you have to do on a confidence level. What's your confidence level? Is it you are very highly confident something will happen, or low confidence something will happen? It's usually moderate or moderate to low something will happen, unless something clear in the indicator that there is something going to happen, such as an attack, and there's clear evidence that there's some preparation going on. And there's institutional and political constraints, but I will talk about later, and ethical and normative risks, such as how data disclosure can endanger activists or vulnerable communities, such as like a democracy movement in authoritarian countries. There's privacy concerns in digital trace analysis, and policymakers may interpret or overtrust quantitative outputs, especially when it's the only source of truth. And again, on the policy and institutional constraints, whenever you have a quantitative data and the data analysis you think is strong, you still have to cross the barrier of actually making sure that your research is received well and is actually influential and impactful. So these are the big challenges of any research in foreign policy. So first of all, information flow is relational and political. So who you know really matters as much as what you know. So who produces analysis? For example, if you are someone from EEI, which might be more close to Republican circles, it may be ignored when you go to Democratic circles or Democratic policymakers. You have strong policy recommendations that are based on really clear evidence, but they don't listen to you because you're on the other side, which is unfortunate because policy and evidence should not be one side or the other. But that's the reality in a lot of places around the world. And there's pre-existing beliefs and institutional consensus that are hard to challenge. For example, in 2013 and 2014, ISIS was rising, and a lot of people think, oh, this is fake news because we've defeated Al-Qaeda in Iraq because of the surge, which was highly successful in 2008. But ultimately, people were a lot blindsided when ISIS took over Iraq and Syria. And there's also cultural resistance within foreign policy committees. Many officials value in-country experience more, and spending time in the country or studying the region or learning the language. So if you have quantitative talent, you make sure you have like the domain expertise that you need to make sure that everything you're speaking the same language and you are in tune and in line with the rest of the community. So a data scientist who is much more generalist, who is very advanced in methods or analytical techniques, are taken less seriously, unfortunately, than someone who is much more specialized, such as a Middle East political economist or a defense analyst who uses AI and machine learning, but they are very specialized in wargaming. Lastly, institutional incentives shape which findings gain traction. Again, this is related number two, which is there's existing biases in the community, such as pro-intervention in Washington, D.C. Anything that is against intervention sometimes will have pushback from certain money interests, such as maybe a certain country's lobbying interests or the defense lobbyists. So researchers must be able to defend the results that challenge these entrenched or well-funded interests. So this alludes to kind of like a lot of the things why the US is very much pro-intervention, even though popularly it's not. Um, like publicly, people don't really support spending so much money overseas. So the key takeaways that I've kind of made from my experience is that one, quantitative methods are promising, but they have to clearly add value. Really, policymakers care about insights, not really techniques. And you have to explain what a method really reveals that others cannot. Secondly, you have to communicate for a quant logic audience. Unfortunately, people in Washington, D.C. or in traditional like policy circles are not very aligned, like I guess well warm towards something that's too hype if they don't understand it. So you have to boil results into clear, actionable findings that fit into a 15-minute policy briefing. They may be meeting another prime minister or another foreign leader or like their boss in the State Department, and you have to be able to be precise and clear in your findings. Your insight matters more than innovation, again, related to the second point. And your networks and credibility shape influence, so you have to build your networks, you have to keep networking, and you have to be have good reputation and make sure that your works are visible and well received in the community. And lastly, domain expertise is still very essential. You have to pair your quant skills with strong substantive knowledge of the region or the issue you're studying. And that's all. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And I'll take any questions.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for very interesting presentations. My first question is regarding to the unpredictabilities, like for example, Trump's policy that changing over the times, and maybe it make some countries are not really confident in measuring the next movement, especially in responding to this kind of like unpredictable leadership policy, something like that. And second part is about the data collections, the use of the agentic AI. I've talked with one of the founder of the AI company last time, and then he said that they produced the data survey for the government using the agentic AI. So they claim that the accuracy level is around 70%. But how do you think it's going to impact to, creating more bias maybe in the research result, for example? Because it's just like replicating the person and not using the real data sources.
Yes. Oh, so on the first question on unpredictability, I think this is where quant methods has faces limits. Um, I
Mm,
think when you have domain expertise, you can know what like I guess like how do you analyze something, how do you approach something, rather than and quantitative methods become just one part of the method. So it's not just one tool because there are other tools to analyze a certain event. So when I talk about unpredictability, of course, like there's limited data set, like limited data points when you
mm,
predict someone's next movement is. So you have to go into another approach, which is basically trying to psychologically analyze or basically analyze the ideology much more. That is much more qualitative, right? So this is why quantitative methods is promising, but only to a certain extent, always in foreign policy research, because at the end of the day, it's very much on elite level kind of moves, and sometimes elites don't have that much data points. So then you have to make a much more probabilistic kind of prediction rather than a precise prediction. But for other kinds of like big data kind of research, such as conflict, where you have a lot of events, then you can have quantitative methods to use as something that can predict something much more accurately. On the second question on agentic I think I agree that biases would be problematic. At the same time, I think agentic AI has potential in, I think, automating a lot of things that you probably be too like too time intensive or labor intensive on manually, such as collecting a lot of data just from different sources, very much in like neutral value, like face value. But again, you have to know what the biases are in the first place by having the domain expertise. For example, if you want to collect using agentic AI to automatically collect data sources for events and for surveys, you have to know, like, make sure that you recognize that certain biases exist. And that's where domain expertise also is very powerful in this case.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nia. All right. Keen, how do you say it? You have your hands raised. Keen, you muted?
Oh, sorry, I was struggling to find the unmute button. Hi, Garda, I'm Kai. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for the presentation. So I have two questions. One is I was really fascinated by the methods that you described about the how to extract the who acted, what happened, when kind of information from articles. I'm curious, like if you use NLP for those, for that, do you do like just like named entity recognition, or is there any other techniques that you could use to kind of increase the accuracy in which an algorithm can scrape that information? Um, and my other question is, I was curious if you could give us like kind of an example of the type of model and prediction that you could build using this kind of data, because you mentioned something about how models can be oversimplifying some things, and you have to kind of qualify your prediction with what level of confidence you have. So it will be helpful to like for me to understand what kind of predictions are you making with what kind of models, and what metrics are you using to kind of quantify the quality of the model that was produced.
I see. Okay, so the first question on name entity recognition, I think that's yeah, I think that's being used right now. So it's much more easier to collect a lot of data on like events. I think Hackler might have to use it, but at the same time, they still it's labor intensive and time intensive to like do quality control because you really want to make sure all the data is correct because you're collecting so many variables from like one article and you have to cross check with different articles sometimes to ensure the accuracy of the reporting. So again, name entity recognition is already being used. And NLP, yeah, it's also being used in terms of making sure everything's accurate and cross-checked with different like to make sure everything is like accurate from between different sources. Secondly, the second question is on the modeling. I think I'm not that familiar with really what modeling can do in terms of because what we have known is that like there's still like there's the you cannot just it's like a different approach from business where you want to make sure like you can do like recommendations very quickly with like a recommendation system, whereas in I think foreign policy is still there's not the analyst at the end of the day still looking at the data itself and the analysis itself and making sure the analysis that it produced is translatable and interpretable for a foreign policy audience. So at the end of the day, like you want to have all the data and the insights on one side. You want, as an analyst, you want to see it first. So you want to make sure that the prediction that you're making is from your side. It's not the model side doing it. The model side can only, I guess, analyze and perhaps help you, the AI or machine learning can help you collect data or other ways, such as labeling data. But I think there's still pushback against making sure like analyses or delicious insights are just purely produced by the models themselves. So at the end of the day, I think like prediction wise, it can never be to the level of like private sector where you have so much like something can be predicted in a way of like and then a recommendation model for Spotify or a recommendation model for shopping where they give you this like a ad or this music that's etc. You cannot predict an event, I think, with AI model. Yeah.
Yeah, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
I guess what I wanted to know was like when you say build models, like what is the metric that they are predicting? Is it like, let's say, just in making up an example, like the probability by which China is going to invade Taiwan in the next year? Like the
Mhm.
model will produce like from 0 to 1, the probability. Is that kind of prediction that you're talking about?
I see. I would say it's still much more like I don't think you I don't think it's like in the foreign policy world is still is toward that precision yet. I think people are still like very qualitative in the confidence level. So you have kind of low confidence, moderate confidence, high confidence, and then they don't want to quantify it usually because of, I guess, reasons unknown that people are just generally not confident in very precise numbers. But I guess it really depends on domain expertise again, on what do you think is low confidence, high confidence, medium confidence. It can mean different things to different people. But at the same time, I think it should be going to that way. Uh, and again, but you have to, people will say this is like a rare event. So it's really hard to predict what is going to happen until like very close to the actual event, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, is there any other question? Okay, I guess there's no other question. Liz, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any other questions, I mean, speak now or forever hold your peace. But I don't have any questions. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation, Garda, and taking your time to be with us tonight. So,
You're welcome. I really enjoyed sharing this. And if you have any questions you want to ask about like careers in the space or really random questions, just let me know on LinkedIn. You can search my name on LinkedIn and just add me. And thank you so much.
all right, awesome.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Garda. I'm going to text you and see if it's okay if I like post some stuff. But thank you again so much for your taking the time to be with us and creating that.
No problem. No problem. It's my pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.